Hello everybody, welcome to Plod With Me TV. My name is Colin and today is another day where I'm going to take you around a little bit of London and tell you a bit about its history. And today we're on Soho and we're going to see a little bit of Soho, by no means all of it, but we'll have a look around and we're starting off here in Soho Square. So this, as I say, is Soho Square, and this is basically really, I suppose, where Soho, you could say, started off. This was developed in the 1680s. Now, prior to that, this land was used by the king and his sort of mates for doing hunting and that sort of thing. And the general belief is that the word Soho, for the area, comes from a hunting cry at that time. Although I did read an article, apparently there was a recorded use of it prior to this. So it might be one of those things that is lost in the mists of time. But either way, that's the generally accepted view of how Soho got its name. Now this gentleman here that we're walking over to, this is King Charles II. And he was the monarch at the time that the Soho was developed. And that's why originally this square was known as King Square. But over time, it generally became known as Soho Square. Now if I just sort of come around here, I'll show you, you can sort of see the square, and I'm looking from the north side towards the south, and I'll put in a little picture, an artist's impression, which if I remember it is from the early 1700s, and you'll see there's not an awful lot of difference apart from that mock Tudor building behind Charles. So I've seen lots of people, tourists and whatnot, taking pictures outside it because it is very picturesque, but it's not as old as it looks. That actually dates from about the 1920s, and it doubles up as I suppose like a storage room, but it also covers up an electrical substation underneath it. And by all accounts, during the Second World War, there are tunnels underneath here where there was, but during the bombs, during the air raids, people would go down underneath. Behind the building there, where you've got the two modern buildings, initially when the square was developed, there was one big house. It's called Monmouth House, and it was the home of the Duke of Monmouth, who was one of the illegitimate sons of the king. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long for him here, because he made a bid for taking over the crown himself and didn't make it, and then was executed a few years later. And that coincided with a lot of the people, the rich people who had moved into this area, started moving away. Now initially people came here, the Duke was here, there was very successful people here, and that attracted other rich people. But a couple of things started happening, and people, the rich people, the influential people, started to move further west up towards Mayfair, where, to be honest, a lot of them still are today, 3,500 years later. And there's a couple of reasons for this. There's several reasons, but one of them was here in Soho, the population began to change. There was increasingly artisan immigrants coming over, because late 1600s, time of turmoil, you had Greek Street, as it is known now. That's where a lot of Greek people came, as they were having trouble with the Turks and they were fleeing. You had a lot of Italians come here over the next couple of hundred years, because you got to remember that 1600s, 1700s, Germany, Italy weren't recognised states as such in the way that we know them today. They were still in this process of being born. There was a lot of turmoil and different groups who felt persecuted one way or another, be it for religious reasons or whatever. A lot of them would come over to England. And Soho became one of those areas, and so it was seemed to be very attractive to artisans. So people like, furniture makers, silversmiths, frame makers, woodworkers, all that sort of stuff tended to be attracted to this area. And I suppose it's the age-old thing of once one group of people gets in and they send word back, if somebody else of that sort of ilk is looking to come to the area, come to London, they're going to move to the same sort of area, because that's where the work is. So over time, that's how that built up. And for the rich people, it was all very well, having the bloke who could mend your clock, to hand, but you don't want to live next to him. There's certain standards that need to be kept, and that wasn't one of them. And that would have been one of the reasons why, some of them started moving further away, as I say, towards Mayfair. So we're going to have a wander around a bit of Soho now, but I just thought I would show you Soho Square first, because that was really the hub of the origins of the area in terms of really development. London was, in the 1600s, London was starting to spread out from the City of London. In the 1630s you had Covent Garden, which was the first square in London with the rich people again. And it had been very successful, and so developers and planners, wanting to attract people who could afford to buy the more expensive houses, put more squares around the place as London was developing, and this was one of them. But let's go and have a look at some of the individual buildings, and we'll start walking. So I'll do the church on another time. Like it's St Patrick's Church, and it's the oldest church dedicated to St Patrick in London. And if we're up at another time and it's a bit less busy, I'll maybe see if I can get some footage inside for you.
Or he'll call me.
Now this building here, Manor House, basically has had several incarnations. The current building is, and the look of it, was thanks to a company called Cross and Blackwell, who, if you don't know, here in Britain, they're big sellers of beans, baked beans. And this was their headquarters for about 100 years. And they sort of rebuilt and redeveloped this property. But prior to that, if you had been here, fire engine, don't want to get in the way of them. If you had been in that building between about 1778 and 801, you would have been staying at what was supposedly a very swanky hotel. But what it was actually was a very, very high-class brothel called the White House, where apparently all, manner of goings-on were recorded in there. And it was also a Spanish embassy at one stage. But as I say, 1800s, Cross and Blackwell essentially knocked down the old building and put that one in its place. Now, next building of interest is this one. Now, I don't know if you can read the blue plaque, but it says Mary Seacole, 1805 to 1881, Jamaican nurse and heroine of the Crimean War, lived here. And apparently this is where she lived while she wrote her autobiography about her wonderful adventures. Now, Mary Seacole, if you don't know, let's take a step back. Crimean War, the most famous person basically that came out of the Crimean War, apart from maybe the Earl of Sandwich, who invented the sandwich, was Florence Nightingale. And it was because she changed the way that nursing was practiced, improved medical standards greatly, and did great stuff. Mary Seacole was also a nurse, but obviously she had some barriers in that she was of mixed race. And I believe she tried to get out using the official channels to get out to Crimea to give her nursing skills. Her father had been in the army, and she obviously felt the calling to go and help. But for whatever reason, and I'll have to read the biography, she didn't manage it. So she just took herself off, and she set herself up on site where the battles, near where the battles were, and basically tended to the soldiers. And from the little I've read about it, I think it was almost like a hotel come hospital, because needed to raise the money somehow, so maybe buy beer of an evening, the ones that were well enough. But she would attend to the soldiers. Now, a lot of historians, especially the ones that are big fans of Florence Nightingale, I have seen interviews, documentaries, where they are really scathing of Mary Seacole. Not a proper nurse. She was using what you would call today is sort of natural herbs and all that sort of stuff, as opposed to sort of scientific methodologies. But two things. One is Florence Nightingale, for all the great work that she did, I believe her hospital was about a day's stay away on the railway. Mary Seacole was on site. There were stories of her going onto the battlefield, Some of them maybe a bit exaggerated, bullets going through the skirts as she was tending people and whatnot, but basically she was, very nearby. They'd go on the battlefield. The soldiers called her Mother Seacole. Second thing is, I believe it was 1857, a year or two after the Crimean War ended, she had come to London. She was basically down on her luck, wasn't doing too well, and some of the soldiers and the generals, more importantly, heard about this. And there was a big gala of events for 4 nights. They held big fundraising things for her here in London. Even the royal family attended. So, whatever the historians may say about her, obviously the soldiers at the time had a lot of respect for her, and thanked her for the work that she did during the Crimean War in the mid-50s, 1850s. So that was Mary Seacole's house, and she now has a statue down. If you're ever down towards Parliament, Palace of Westminster, across the river, St Thomas's Hospital, it's actually like near where the Florence Nightingale Museum is, and Mary Seacole now has her own statue in the garden there. Now, we're going to go up towards this corner. If you ever come to London and you want to have a cycle around the place, you can see these, which were colloquially known as Boris bikes. This is them, you just sort of hire them out. Now, as I was saying, a lot of people from other countries came over here, and one of the groups of people that came over was the Huguenots from the late 1600s, 1685 onwards, really, to be exact. And essentially, what happened was the Huguenots had been a basically persecuted religion in France for a period of time, and there had been a big thing, I think it was the 1650s, called the St Bartholomew's Day Massacre, where people were literally dragged out into the street and murdered. And then there was a bit of sort of legal protection for them called the Edict of Nantes, where basically other religions were allowed to practice their faith. But come 1685, the then king in France, whose name I can't remember, I'll put it in, he revoked that, what was called the Edict of Nantes, and the Huguenots suddenly thought, we could be looking at more massacres here, we need to get out of Dodge. And so they started looking for other places to go to, and King Charles II, who, the king here at the time, basically he had spent time in exile in France after his father had been executed in 1649. And he knew all about the persecutions, and he said to them, come here if you want to. So not all of them, but a number of them did. And this is one of the last Huguenot churches. So, very nice building. It was designed by a guy called Sir Aston Webb, if memory serves. And he also designed the Victoria and Albert Museum. And if you've ever been to the V&A, you'll recognise the style, that sort of terracotta look to it. But basically, that church now, it still holds all its services in French. It has a huge sort of archive of Huguenot history, literature and everything else. So if ever you're wanting to do any research in the Huguenots, that's the place to come to. But as I say, everything's still in French. And, whenever it's open, you can always pop in and have a look. Closed today. Now, well, next building, now this square, you can tell, it's still got a lot of important stuff going on. Still quite a wealthy area. One days gone by, Soho was anything but wealthy, but these days, this is MPL. And anybody care to hazard a guess as to what is in here? No. Any takers? This is McCartney Publishing Limited. So basically, Paul McCartney of Beatles fame has one of the biggest private collections of, well, not private, they're public now, but biggest collections of published music. And outside of like really huge corporations, he's got a vast collection himself, which is how his businesses go on to make money, as well as his songs. And this is the headquarters, and it was also where he would run the business of the day-to-day, organising the tours and everything else of Wings back in the 70s when he bought this place. And he actually had a replica of the studio at Abbey Road Studios where the Beatles recorded. He had a replica built into the basement here. So I suppose he could do all types of work. He could do the music and he could do the business upstairs. But this is still where McCartney Publishing is based. So some days when you come past, you can sort of see some of the nice artwork and stuff upstairs. It depends if the blinds are open. But today, obviously, it's closed. So we're going to leave Soho Square now. There's other bits to it, but we'll do that on another talk. And we're going to go around Carlisle Street. It's a bit uniformly grey today, the weather. The weathermen say it's down to weather people. Sorry, my mistake. Say it's down to a feature called anticyclonic gloom, which I suppose sounds a bit more scientific than calling it something like Edna. But that's the reason why we've had grey days for the last few days, and not much in the way of rain, sunshine, or anything else. Alright, so excuse the noise of the lorry. I'm just going to go around the back of it here. Oh, and if you're interested, the Resident there is a boutique hotel. Now, that's probably one more for the British contingent, if anybody's watching from the UK. But if you're a fan of Private Eye, the satirical magazine from, I think it was 1961 onwards, this is their offices here in Soho. For those of you abroad, Private Eye mostly deals with political satire, pointing out the shortcomings of politicians, which is obviously hard to find, but they seem to manage to do it. Now, we're going to go down Dean Street. Soho's, getting a bit busy. It's lunchtime. Okay, and St. Anne's Court.
Yeah, when I get back to my room. Let's sketch.
Well, this building here is obviously closed up. All the signage has been taken down. This was, just passing thing. There's a magazine over here called Good Housekeeping Magazine. And sometimes, like in the middle of summer, you come down here and you'd see it all set up with, Christmas trees and all the rest of it. Obviously for the photographic shoots for later in the year. They'll be preparing it all in the summer, which always felt a bit surreal. But obviously it's closed now.
David Bowie had. Anyway, went to New York, stayed with them. This is more about Ziggy Stardust.
Right. Excuse the slight delay in explaining that sign. There's a gentleman doing a tour, so I didn't want to interrupt him. But basically, the blue plaque there pointed out the fact that there was used to be a recording studio in there. And oh, they're finishing. Let's walk back up. Let's walk back up.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It's not right.
So yeah, so this was a recording studio, and it says here, David Bowie, obviously died in 2016. His albums Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust and Space Oddity, the single, were recorded here at Trident Studios. But not just that, there was a whole host of absolute gold-plated classic songs were recorded here. So Elton John's Your Song, Hey Jude by the Beatles, let's see, Bohemian Rhapsody, James Taylor, Caroline on My Mind. You know, I think that one of his early albums was done here. But basically, it wasn't just, you know, singles, it was whole albums, were famous albums that were recorded here in this studio. And until I think about 10-15 years ago, even though the studio closed up, you used to be able to go in and, you know, have a look around it, but I think it's a private residence now, and all those days are gone. Yeah, there's about 7 or 8 buttons now, so it's obviously all been redeveloped into separate flats, which is always the way. But this is where all that fantastic music was created. And apparently one of the reasons that they'll come here, I think Elton John liked the sound of the piano, amongst other things, but also at the time in the early 70s, the Beatles had been using 4-track recording devices, and then here they had moved on to 8-track, which gave them a lot more options. Obviously, you can do way more than that now with just a phone, but in those days, this was a bit special. So, yeah, classic music. And Soho, we're now on Wardour Street. This is what Soho certainly is from about 40s, 50s onwards. So it became famous for it was the movie industry, the cafe culture, the sex trade, criminality. A lot of famous gangsters, you know, had their places here, in collusion with the police, I might add. But the arts, you know, writers, artists, as I say, around the 1600s, a lot of the artisans would come here to live. It continued, like I say, with all the different arts and crafts that you can think of. They came here to live, and there's still a big movie industry trade going on here, as well as art and everything else. But because it is that way, whereas before impoverished artists and writers could have afforded to come here and find somewhere to live, these days in London there's nowhere cheap, and whereas, you know, little studios and whatnot could have tried their luck here in the past, probably in the 60s and 70s, nowadays you need a small fortune to rent a place or buy a place. So we'll walk up Wardour Street a little bit more. Nice looking pub, the George. I would imagine named after one of the kings. We had several Georges in a row. Right, so we're going to nip down Noel Street and tell you a little bit. Oh, and if you're interested, that next street up there is Orchard Street. So we're sort of running parallel with it now. But I just thought I'd tell you about a little bit of history here. And not a lot of people know about.
Yeah. I know that, like,
So this brown building here has a bit of history. You wouldn't know it. It's all very, what do you call, not closed up, but discreet looking. I believe it's some sort of broadcast place. I think maybe film related now. But the building itself has a bit of a darker history. So if we go back to 1922, there has been a new leader put in place in Europe, and he has started doing the rounds of all the different countries around Europe to introduce himself, see who's friendly to him, who isn't. The same thing all the leaders do now. You'll notice as soon as you get a new prime minister, president, whatever it might be, unless it's America, they don't need to, but everybody else, they tend to do the rounds, go and meet other leaders and get to know each other. And this one was no different. So I think it was October 22. So he comes over here and he meets the king. He meets, the prime minister. Apparently, they thought he was, a bit of used to wear ill-fitting clothes, bit of an oaf, bit bombastic, talk rubbish. And no, it wasn't Boris Johnson. This was 100 years ago, but very similar. He even managed to be late for one of his appointments with one of the more important people because he was spending time with a prostitute. And he then came here as part of his trip over because his name was Benito Mussolini, and this was the headquarters of the Fascist organisation in the UK, certainly here in London. So,
and I'm being made to
well, it would have been the UK because it wouldn't have been that big anywhere else. So, this was the Fascist headquarters. Strangely enough, there isn't a plaque to that. Strange, isn't it? But so a bit of darker history there. Now, I'm just going to go here. This is more of a visual clue, this one. Any Oasis fans in the house? Now's your time to see if you can spot the location. Alright, now, does this ring any bells? Like I was saying, this area, music, film, literature, this street here is one of the big music publishing streets. And if you can recognise this street, have a look next time you're listening to What's the Story Morning Glory. Check out the album cover. One side is that, and the other side, you'll see the corner of Noel Street here. So, that's one for the Oasis fans. Bit of rock history. Plenty of that around here. Okay. So we're going to continue down this way. We've got a minute or two before the next bit. So, how about a bit of music? So we're in Pole Street. We're at opposite number 32. And I would suspect that the people who own the building don't even know the history of what went on here. If I just scroll up. So in the late 1800s, I think it was around about, if memory serves, 1885 thereabouts, this was the scene of a huge scandal. Lots of publicity. So essentially, back in those days, child prostitution was quite commonplace and was indulged in by the rich and affluent, as well as anybody else that could afford it. And there was a campaigning journalist who I mentioned in my Westminster walk, a guy called W.T. Stead. And Stead was a great campaigner for various social issues, and he believed that the press had a role to play in changing society for the better. One thing I would say is his methods were sometimes dubious, but you can't sort of fault what he was trying to do. So what happened here was, as I say, he was highlighting the cause of child prostitution. Somebody with a very loud motorbike on Oxford Street. And there had been numerous attempts by campaigners to try and get Parliament to raise the age of consent. Because at the time it was the age of consent with somebody that for sex was 13. And there had been calls for it to be raised, and Parliament just never got around to it. Just one of those things, wasn't that important. So what Stead did, he had a paper, and he, for weeks beforehand, he led up to it, this article, and essentially he kept saying to people, I've got this story, it's so shocking, you won't want to read it, so please don't buy it whenever it comes out, because it's just too terrible for you to read about, and I don't want to offend your sort of sensibility, so whatever you do, don't read this. And then he released it, and it was called The Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon. And he told a story about how he had arranged with the brothel keeper here to have sex with a young girl. Went into great detail about what he was planning to do with her, and the brothel keeper just went, yeah, that's fine. And then the brothel keeper then went to the point of trying to chloroform the young girl. Instead, make sure that there was a witness with him to make sure that they could testify that nothing actually went on. But basically, it was right to the point of the act taking place, and then instead, basically revealed that it was all a sting operation. The next day, the young girl was carted off to France. I don't think she had any say in the matter, but they sent her off to France to stay with some stranger's place. And then he printed the paper, and London went nuts. Immediate sellout. They were getting paper in from all the other newspapers. It was selling out. There was 1.5 million copies, black market copies of this being made, and it caused a huge political stink. So much so that the powers that be were threatening to prosecute him. And he just said, fine, take me to court, and then I'm going to name, politicians, aristocracy, everything as part of my case. And he called their bluff. And then what happened was they actually did increase the age of consent to 16. And that actually became known as the Stead Act. So that basically took place in this building, the initial meeting of the young girl. And then that changed the course of English history in that regard, which is a good thing. So Stead, very brilliant journalist, even influence and had meetings with William Randolph Hearst in America, probably taught him some of the tactics. Unfortunately, he then drowned in the Titanic. There's a story about that as well. That's a funny one. But so that's the story behind this building, which, as I say, again, not even a plaque. I'll point out a little plaque down here. It's not like I've read up much about it or anything. It's just when you're wandering around London, sometimes you look up, you just see weird little signs, bits of history, and that's one of the things I love about wandering the streets of London. And you just sort of find yourself thinking, what the hell's that about? And this is one of them. So the writing is very small, so I'll read it for you. Hold on, get past this van. And of course there's another big van coming. So above this pub, this blue plaque, it says, in the old King's Arms Tavern, the ancient order of Druids was revived 25th of November, I think it is, 1781. And then there's very small writing underneath, which I can't make out. But yeah, the ancient order of Druids, like what are we talking about here? King Arthur's men, you know? So unusual. Right, we're going to go down Baldwin Street now. Again, probably a minute or two before we get to the next stop. So I suggest another musical interlude. Oh yeah, and if you like these sort of walks, feel free to subscribe. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this pub. Now the first thing to say about the pub is it's a bit ironic. Called the Jon Snow. It's not named after the guy from Game of Thrones, but it's named after a very famous doctor, and as it happens he was teetotal, didn't touch the stuff, never did, and yet there's a pub named after him. But the real story behind Jon Snow is to do with this pump. So this was one of the greatest medical discoveries ever. So the discovery of how cholera was passed between people. Now 1800s especially in London there were numerous attacks of cholera. Like in 1849 I think it was about 54,000 people died. There was another attack when Snow was really starting to investigate it, 1850s. Another 10,000 people died. And in this area where he was a doctor, out of 39 houses, 37 of them somebody died. So this is like COVID on steroids, really. And that, much like COVID, I can remember when COVID was starting over here in the UK, we were seeing footage of what was happening in Italy because it hit there first. And the big thing was, what the hell's going on? How's this spreading? Where'd it come from? All the rest of it. And in the 1800s, the effects of cholera were being felt all over Europe and further abroad. But it was a mystery as to how it was being transmitted. They just couldn't figure it out. If you ever read into it, it would skip whole cities and then it would go backwards and hit them and all the rest of it. And there was lots of theories. Excuse me, well, wipe me nose. Oh, right, that's better. So, there was lots of theories, and the main one, the one that took hold among the scientific community, was that it was being spread through the air, because you have to remember in the 1800s, London stank to high heaven. The sewage system wasn't what it should have been, in the certainly mid-1850s, prior to that. Sewage system was an absolute joke. There was, horses and animals and all the rest of it dropping their doings all over the street. And the place stank to high heaven, and you had the fogs at different times of the year. And the idea was it's the miasma. But John Snow, who was a very diligent, very sort of astute doctor, he started investigating himself, and he started forming his own theories. Now, this was a guy who had pioneered, the use of anaesthetics to the extent that he was treating Queen Victoria, which had a couple of her kids and whatnot. And he started forming a theory that it was waterborne, and nobody would take him seriously. It was just, no, definitely not. It's in the air. And then he persuaded the local parish council, whatever it was, that to remove the pump handle from this pump. And suddenly the figures dropped radically. Now even then, didn't completely, it's not like the scientific community took it on wholesale. People were still saying, no, it's just coincidence and all the rest of it. But this pump handle, or this pump, now it's obviously not the original one. And there is a red brick somewhere here, which I've seen before, and I can't find it, but shows the actual site. Oh, I'm going to have a look for that. But basically, this is representative of the pump that was used as part of his experiment. So they took a handle so people couldn't use it, therefore they couldn't access the water from this particular location, and that's what made all the difference. And in 2003, it was a doctor's magazine where they held a vote of who was the most significant medical practitioner of all time, and he won, even more than Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath. Snow was reckoned to be, the main man, I suppose because he went against the establishment and the prevailing view and did his own experiments and then proved it right. So, which is the whole nature of science, really. So there is a granite curbstone which is red, and I've seen it, and I can't find it. I'm losing the plot. So the granite curbstone marks the site. There it is. It's something that bleeding fake. Hold on. Yeah, you see that there underneath the bank? There's a granite. There we go. So that's where the actual pump was. So they basically put the one for the tourists, like myself. They put it right next to where the pump actually was. So that is the story of John Snow and the discovery of the transmission of cholera. Now, how are we doing for time? I've got to have some lunch and then I'm going to the theatre. So I think that might be us for today. I will continue wandering around Soho at some point in the future. But at the minute, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know, was it good for you? Or, are you going to have a post-tour coffee, or what's your plans? And let me know if there's anywhere in particular you want me to wander about, or if you have any questions about anything I've been talking about today. So as I say, if you like these walks, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Not sure where, but hope you enjoyed it. See ya. Bye. I should say, if you like this tour and you'd like to do another one, hit one of the ones next. There'll be somewhere up here. And I'll see you then.